It was September 1st, 1939. A brutal surprise attack by Hitler's Germany on neighboring Poland. Central to Germany's plan for overwhelming victory was its air force, the Luftwaffe. Days later, Britain and France declared war against Germany. World War II had begun. But with bombs falling in Europe, Americans geared up to fight, Black America included.
I believe it was my duty and responsibility, my father did and my grandfather did, that the country's in trouble, you work for it, you do what you have to do.
You can't turn your back on your own country. So we're as patriotic as anybody else. And so we wanted our chance to prove that we could do something.
But for African Americans, answering the call of duty meant defending a country that saw them as second-class citizens. The Pittsburgh Courier, the leading black newspaper of the day, called for a national campaign to fight for a double victory.
African Americans were actually fighting a war on two fronts. The standard war that everyone else understood, which was for victory over fascism. But the double V, the other prong, meant victory over racism and discrimination at home in the United States.
Your nation calls on you to go out and fight and die for your country, and you can't even sit down in a restaurant and eat a hot dog. It's not a pleasant feeling when you look at it in the long range and you think, what am I giving my life for? What am I volunteering to die for?
If you became a pilot in the United States Air Force, you automatically became a commissioned officer, which meant that you could give any white non-commissioned officer orders.
For the Air Corps, it was unthinkable for blacks to command whites, let alone fly airplanes. As justification, Air Corps leaders pointed to a 1925 report written by the Army itself.
The document said that Negroes were lazy, they didn't have enough sense, they had no coordination.
And they lacked the intelligence to handle sophisticated type of chores, like driving tanks or flying airplanes, and even if they did, they lacked the bravery to successfully engage in combat.
This 1925 War College report really reflects the racist atmosphere in the United States in the interwar period.
The 1925 study became really influential, and it's very unfortunate that it did because it remained influential into the late 1930s, early 1940s.
Under orders from the White House, the Army reluctantly activated the nation's first black aviation unit, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. The unit would be made up of just 33 pilots and several hundred ground crew, a tiny fraction of the 30,000 pilots the Army planned to train.
The generals refer to it without any irony whatsoever all the way through as the experiment.
Thousands of young, ambitious black men applied for the coveted spots.
In order to get into the cadet training program, black or white, one had to have at least 2 years of college, at a time when I think fewer than 1% of African Americans had a college degree. So this really is the cream of the crop.
I really didn't care whether it was segregated unit or non-segregated. I wanted to fly. And I would do anything to get the opportunity to fly.
Flying itself was so much fun. In the air, there's no black or white or green or whatever. You're a pilot. And that helped to mute some of the racism on the ground because we wanted to fly. That was it. We wanted to fly.
You keep finding that the great majority of officers really would like to scuttle this whole operation. But there are enlightened white officers at every point that are instrumental in helping it to succeed.
One such individual took command at Tuskegee in early 1943, a young colonel from the South, Noel Parrish.
He did tell us that he would be fair with us, and that word was very important. And I have to admit that the man kept his word to the T.
America had been at war for more than a year. The U.S. and its allies, Britain and the Soviet Union, were attacking German-held positions from all sides. On April 1st, 1943, after a 6-month wait, the men of the 99th got the word and started packing, and bound for North Africa. The airmen's assignment: drive the Germans out of Pantelleria, a strategic stepping stone to the Italian peninsula. Sorties against the heavily fortified island began with ground strafing missions.
That's the worst mission a fighter jock could have, was strafing. You go in at a stationary target, but there's stationary gunners out there. They're not moving. And they can just sit there and track you across the horizon.
In just 2 weeks, air power alone brought Pantelleria to its knees. By the fall of 1944, the Red Tails escorted bombers day in and day out. Along with the new high-profile assignment came a spectacular new airplane. The most advanced tactical fighter in the war, the P-51 Mustang.
Well, I think it felt like going from a Model A Ford to a jet. It was a real transition, a real fine one.
My check out in the P-51, that was half scary and half joyous. Once I got the bird in the air, hey, I was in hog heaven, you know, because it was a nice fine bird.
Flight speeds of 440 miles an hour, excellent high altitude performance. You've got the plane to match up now and go the distance.
As the bombers pushed deeper into enemy territory, the escort missions became increasingly dangerous.
All of those targets were heavily guarded. They had all kinds of flak burns down there. And we could see all this flak coming up, you know.
They'd fired from the ground, and when the shell explodes, it throws all these pieces out. This is what tore airplanes apart. We couldn't do anything about the flak, but good chance I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for that fighter protection.
The missions went on and on and on.
All of these guys were playing Russian roulette. The life expectancy of a fighter pilot was probably 15 to 20 missions.
Keep in mind that we're talking about guys who were 19 like myself. The old dudes were 23, you know. They had just passed teenage and just gotten there. And to accept and live with these losses was something they had to grow into.
You're flown with a guy all day, and I saw 2 of them get killed. There's an empty bed over there, and you don't rest well that night.
March 24th, 1945. Pilots were called to the briefing room. Their mission? Escort B-17 bombers on the first leg of an attack on Berlin. Their direct orders? Protect the bombers at all costs. Halfway through the mission, something went wrong.
We were supposed to be relieved by a white fighter group, and they didn't show up because they had weather problems.
Knowing they'd be pushing their fuel supplies to the limit, the fighter pilots stuck with the bombers and headed to Berlin. As the warplanes approached the target, they suddenly came face to face with the enemy. One of Hitler's secret weapons, the world's first jet fighters.
When they tell you you have the best fighter plane in the sky, and all of a sudden you see a couple of fellas come flying rings around you, and there's nothing you can do about it, that's a pretty helpless feeling.
The planes were Messerschmitt 262s.
Me-262 has a speed that is actually 100 miles in excess of what a Mustang can achieve.
I knew what they were. They were coming in to attack the bombers. I said, drop your tanks, follow me.
The Red Tail pilots had just one advantage over the Nazi jets: maneuverability.
Instead of going this way, I went down, turned the plane upside down, went down under the bombers, and then made a hard right turn, and I caught one of the jets just as he was coming in to shoot down the B-17. I hit him broad stream, boom, he blew up. Bailed out.
The Red Tails downed 2 more of Hitler's ferocious jets. The Berlin mission earned the Red Tails a Distinguished Unit Citation for outstanding performance of duty. A year after the War Department had almost pulled the Black Airmen from combat, top brass from the Army Air Forces visited Ramitelli to personally decorate 4 of the group's pilots. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered, bringing the war in Europe to an end. All told, America's first black fighter pilots had flown more than 1,500 missions, shooting down a total of 112 enemy aircraft. Over the summer, their fellow airmen began returning home.
Coming into New York Harbor with the flags waving and everybody exhilarating, Statue of Liberty.
Down the gangplank we go. There's a soldier that has a sign, white troops this way, colored troops this way.
Back home, back to reality. Segregation, discrimination, and everything else that went along with it.
The double victory had yet to be won. 3 years after the war's end, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, officially banning segregation in the United States military. Within a year, the Red Tails were inactivated.
I moved forward with the attitude that this is going to be progress. And over the years, it proved just that.
The U.S. Air Force, which had become a separate branch of the military in 1947, was one of the first national institutions to integrate.
In many respects, the civil rights movement grows really right out of World War II and the World War II experience.
It was a time in history that we should be very proud of. It's a time of history where we helped change the world. And I think we set the star very, very high for anybody who's following us.
We helped black people raise their heads and say, I can do it.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I can go anywhere I want to go. And I remember a pilot friend of mine saying, America's not perfect, but I'll hold her hand until she gets well.